The studio lights burned softly above the dark room as the cameras started to blink alive. And from the very first second, there was a strange energy in the air, something heavy, something almost electric, and neither the crew members nor the small invited audience could explain why they felt that way. They only knew that something rare was about to unfold, something that does not happen in most interviews, something honest and raw and dangerously close to a secret. People leaned forward even before the host spoke, because Keanu Reeves was sitting silently in his chair with his hands locked together, his shoulders slightly tense, and his eyes focused on the table as if he was trying to hold something inside that had lived in him for years. And that quiet tension, that unspoken pressure already grabbed the room, making everyone forget the sound of the machines, the whispers of staff, the weight of their phones, or even the existence of time. The host noticed it instantly. He knew when a guest came ready to promote something and when a guest came carrying a story that had been waiting for a moment to escape. He watched Keanu carefully, noticing that his usual gentle smile was missing, replaced by an expression so thoughtful that it made the air feel heavy. And that was when he leaned in and said the first line that pulled everyone deep into the next hours. "You look like you've been thinking about something important," he said, his voice calm but curious. "Is everything okay, man?" That single question made the entire audience hold their breath. People did not know what would follow, but they knew this was not going to be one of those casual conversations about movies, stunts, or martial arts training. Something deeper was moving beneath the surface. Everyone could feel it, and Keanu could too. He breathed out slowly, as if finally allowing himself to open a door he had kept closed for too long, and then he lifted his eyes, letting the soft studio lights reflect in them like tiny sparks of memories. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about someone who changed a lot in my life without even knowing it." The room lowered into silence so deep that even the whir of the ceiling fan felt loud. The host leaned back slightly, studying Keanu's expression, and then asked softly, "Someone you worked with? Someone from your past?" Keanu nodded, but he hesitated, almost as if he was afraid that saying her name would alter something in the air, or maybe he was afraid of his own voice betraying a feeling he had never fully shared. The audience sat frozen, their eyes locked on him, waiting for him to reveal who he was speaking about, waiting for a name that they all somehow suspected but did not dare to assume too soon. And then he spoke it. "Sandra." The room did not gasp. It did not need to. The silence itself grew thicker, heavier, more emotional. Everyone knew the history, the rumors, the chemistry, the interviews where both of them laughed shyly when asked about crushes or past feelings, but no one had heard Keanu speak her name like this, with this tone, with this weight. And the host immediately realized that this was not going to be a light story. There was something in the way Keanu said her name that suggested something unfinished, something tender, something painful, and maybe something that still lived inside him. The host placed his elbow on the table, giving Keanu space but also inviting him to go deeper. "Do you want to talk about her?" he asked softly. "Or is it too personal?" Keanu inhaled slowly, and when he exhaled, his voice came out low and steady, but there was something trembling gently under the calm surface, like a memory trying to rise. "I think maybe it's time," he said, "because what she did for me, even without trying, changed everything, and I never told anyone the full story before." One of the camera operators unconsciously adjusted his headset and leaned closer, even though he didn't need to. Crew members stopped moving. A production assistant who had been carrying a clipboard froze near the wall, her eyes widening, and the host seemed almost afraid to interrupt the moment, afraid that if he spoke too loudly, the fragile honesty in the air would disappear. So he only asked the simplest, most careful question. "What happened?" Keanu looked down at his hands again, his fingers slowly unlocking. He was remembering something distant, something perhaps buried under years of work, grief, silence, and survival. He licked his lips absent-mindedly, searching for the right point to begin, and then he whispered, "It was during a time when everything looked fine on the outside, but inside nothing was fine at all." The lights reflected on his face, drawing out every small emotion, every subtle shift in his expression. There was no makeup strong enough to hide the truth he was about to share. His eyes softened, darkened, then pulled inward as the memory unfolded behind them. The host waited carefully. He understood that the first words would shape the entire story, and after a long pause, Keanu continued. "We were filming together," he said quietly, "and I was going through something very heavy in my personal life, but I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to bring that energy to set. I didn't want to be a burden, so I tried to keep it hidden. I tried to smile. I tried to act like everything was okay." His voice became slower, deeper, and the studio felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped slightly. But Sandra saw through it, he whispered. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. That line alone carried so much weight. Everyone knew Sandra Bullock for her warmth, her humor, her emotional sensitivity. But hearing Keanu say it like that, hearing that she saw through something he tried so hard to hide, made the story feel even more intimate, more fragile. The host leaned forward again, unable to hide his curiosity anymore. "What did she see?" he asked softly. Keanu gave a small, sad smile. "She saw the things I thought I had buried, the things I thought were invisible. She saw the heaviness on my shoulders. She saw the way I tried to breathe slowly so I wouldn't break in front of people. She saw the way I walked away when the crew laughed about something because I didn't want them to see I couldn't join in. She saw all of it." And then he added something even more powerful. "She saw me." The host felt his throat tighten and he tried to hide it by clearing it softly. The audience stayed frozen. No one even moved a leg or pulled out a phone. Every single person in that room knew they were listening to a rare moment, one that actors usually keep locked away. And the crew behind the cameras knew that the footage they were capturing would be watched again and again, not because it was sensational, but because it was human. Keanu continued, his voice softer now. "One evening, after a long day, I was sitting alone in this little corner behind one of the trailers. I thought no one knew I went there. I just needed 5 minutes where I didn't have to pretend, and I didn't cry or break down. I just sat there trying to breathe." He paused, then added, "And she found me." The host felt that shift in the air, the same shift everyone felt. This was the beginning of the emotional core of the story. This was the moment everything started. "She didn't say anything at first," Keanu continued. "She didn't ask questions. She didn't make jokes to lighten the mood. She just sat next to me, quietly, and for the first time in many months, someone's silence felt like comfort instead of pressure." One of the audience members pressed a hand to her chest. Someone else wiped his eyes. The studio was no longer a studio. It felt like a room full of people witnessing a confession from a soul that had carried too much. "Did you talk?" the host asked softly. Keanu nodded, not right away, but after a while she asked me something I wasn't ready for. She said, "Keanu, who do you talk to when things get heavy?" He smiled sadly, and I didn't know how to answer her, because the truth was, I didn't talk to anyone, not really. I didn't want people to worry. I didn't want to burden anyone. I always believed I had to carry things alone. He lifted his eyes toward the host, and there was a quiet vulnerability in them. And she said something that changed me more than she will ever realize. He looked down for a moment, gathering the memory, and then his voice softened even more. She said, "Carrying everything alone doesn't make you strong. Letting someone care for you, that's the real strength." The host exhaled slowly. The audience stayed glued to every word. Keanu's voice became a whisper, and in that moment, I realized I had been living my life trying to be strong in all the wrong ways. The room felt like it was breathing with him, rising and falling with every sentence he spoke. "I didn't tell her everything," he continued slowly, "but I told her enough. I told her enough for her to understand how heavy things had become, and she didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't give unrealistic hope. She just listened, and I think that was the first time in a long time I let someone see me." The host swallowed, "And that meant a lot to you?" Keanu nodded, "More than I realized back then, more than I admitted to myself." The silence that followed felt heavier than everything before it. It felt like a doorway opening, a doorway to the deeper part of the story, the part he had been holding for years. The host finally asked the question everyone feared and hoped for. "Keanu, what happened after that night?" Keanu looked up slowly, his eyes calm but filled with something unspoken. He leaned back in his chair, not comfortable but bracing himself. And then, in a voice almost too soft for the microphone, he said, "That night was only the beginning, because something happened a few days later, something I never expected, something that still keeps me awake sometimes." The host's eyes widened slightly. "What happened?" he asked carefully. Keanu hesitated, he took a deep breath, he looked down again. And then he whispered, "She found out something I was trying desperately to hide, something I didn't want her to know, something that could have changed everything between us." The audience inhaled sharply. The host leaned forward, almost afraid to ask but unable to stop himself. "What did she find out?" Keanu's jaw tightened, his eyes grew distant, filled with a memory that hurt to hold. He opened his mouth, and the studio suddenly fell into absolute silence. Because the next words he would say would change the entire story. And he knew it. The silence inside the studio thickened the moment Keanu tried to speak. as if the air itself refused to let the words escape too easily. He swallowed slowly, and the audience leaned forward as one, some with hands near their mouths, others frozen with a stillness that showed their entire attention belonged only to him. The host waited patiently, sensing that whatever Keanu was about to reveal carried a history far deeper than the few hints he had shared so far. Keanu finally released a breath that trembled slightly at the edges, revealing just how heavy the memory was. "She found out something," he repeated softly, "that I had tried so hard to hide because I thought it would only bring more weight into her world." The host's brows lowered gently, and she was not supposed to know. "No," Keanu whispered, "I never wanted her to know, not then, not in that way." He looked toward the studio floor, and for a moment he seemed to leave the room entirely, as if he had fallen back into that older version of himself, the one carrying silent grief and pushing the world away while pretending he was fine. His fingers tightened around each other, and it took him a moment to find enough calm to speak again. "On set," he continued, "people often think actors disappear to rest or memorize lines or check messages. But sometimes people disappear because they are trying to keep themselves together, and during that time in my life, I had become good at disappearing." The host listened closely, his expression softening with a mix of compassion and curiosity. "But Sandra noticed," Keanu said. "She always noticed. She paid attention to things others missed. The way I held my shoulder, the way I paused before answering simple questions, the way I stared at the ground when I thought no one was watching. She had this ability to see what was happening beneath the surface." The audience remained silent, their eyes following every movement of his hands, every shift of his voice. "One morning," Keanu said slowly, "I arrived earlier than everyone else. I wanted a moment alone. I had barely slept the night before because something had happened at home, something that left me feeling like my chest was full of stones." The host leaned in. "What happened?" Keanu inhaled deeply, letting the breath steady him before he continued. "My sister had relapsed," he said quietly, "and I did not know how to handle it. I was trying to support her while working long hours, and I was scared for her, scared for myself, scared for everything. And I did not want to share that with anyone on set, not because I did not trust them, but because I did not want pity. I did not want whispers. I did not want Sandra to look at me differently or worry about me." The room tightened with emotion. Some audience members blinked rapidly, holding back tears. Keanu nodded slightly, understanding their reactions. "I thought I could hide it. I thought I could separate my personal life from the work. But that morning when I arrived early, I sat in my trailer holding my phone, waiting for updates from my family. I felt like my entire world was on fire inside me, and without realizing, I left the door slightly open." The host's eyes widened a little. She walked in. Keanu gave a small, pained smile. She did not walk in. She hesitated first. I heard her footsteps stop outside the door, then I heard her say my name in the softest way, like she was afraid of disturbing a wound she could already sense. The host nodded slowly, imagining it. She said, "Keanu, are you okay? Can I come in?" He closed his eyes, as though hearing her voice again. "I should have said no," he whispered. "I should have closed the door, not because I wanted to push her away, but because I did not want her to see me like that. I did not want her to see me broken, tired, scared, and unsure of how to stay strong." He opened his eyes again, and they carried a hint of the pain he felt in that memory. But I could not speak, and silence became its own answer. The audience swallowed the moment whole. "So she stepped inside," Keanu said softly, "and the moment she saw my face, she knew. She sat down next to me on the couch without saying a word. And when she saw the messages on my phone about my sister, she did something I never expected." His voice grew softer. "She reached out and took my phone gently from my hand, not to invade my privacy, not to control anything, but to give me a moment to breathe." The room shifted emotionally. The host's eyes softened even more. "She held the phone," Keanu continued, "and put it on the table. Then she took my hands in both of hers, looked right at me, and said, 'You do not have to go through this alone.'" The audience felt that line deeply. It rang with sincerity, compassion, and strength, the kind of strength that does not shout but supports quietly, steadily. "I told her I was fine," Keanu said, shaking his head slightly at how untrue that had been. "I told her it was nothing. I told her I needed to focus on the film and that she should not worry, but she did not believe me. She had already seen too much. She squeezed my hands a little tighter and said, 'I can tell when someone is hurting even if they smile at me, especially you.'" He smiled sadly, and that was the moment she found out, not because I told her directly, but because she cared enough to look at me and understand the truth. The host breathed in deeply. And how did that change things between you two? Keanu looked away for a long moment, as if searching in his memory for the exact point where everything shifted. Everything became different, he said, not in a dramatic way but in a quiet way. She started checking on me every morning, asking if I had slept or eaten. She brought me food sometimes, even if I said I was fine. She would stay after filming just to keep me company so I would not go home to silence. She started carrying part of the weight I had never asked anyone to help with. The studio grew even more emotional. She became my anchor, Keanu continued softly. I do not think she ever realized how important she was during that time, but she gave me something I had lost, the feeling that someone genuinely cared about me without expecting anything in return. The host swallowed. And did you ever tell her how much that meant to you? Keanu's eyes darkened with a hint of regret. No, he said quietly, not then, not fully. The audience shifted. Because the more she helped me, Keanu said slowly, the more I felt something I was not prepared to feel. The host leaned forward again. What did you feel? Keanu hesitated, his voice trembled at the edge. I started caring about her in a way that scared me. A ripple of emotion crossed the audience. The host tightened his fingers against the table. Scared you? He asked softly. Keanu nodded. Yes, because she was becoming the one person I trusted more than anyone else. The one person I felt safe with. And when you have lost people before, when you know what it feels like to watch someone slip away, caring that deeply becomes terrifying. His breath shook slightly. I was afraid of losing her, afraid of depending on her, afraid of confusing her kindness with something it might not have been. I did not want to bring my pain into her life. He paused. And that fear, it made me take a step back just when she was reaching out the most. The host's eyes widened slightly. You pulled away. Keanu closed his eyes for a second. I did, and that is when things became complicated, because she did not understand why. She thought she had done something wrong. The audience reacted quietly to the weight of those words. She confronted me one evening, Keanu continued, and she asked me why I was suddenly distant. She asked me why I was avoiding her, and I had no answer that would not hurt her. I did not want to lie, but I also did not want to tell her the truth. The host frowned gently. Why not? Keanu looked down. Because the truth was messy, the truth was vulnerable, the truth was that I was starting to fall for her in a way that felt dangerous. The audience gasped in silence. And I thought, Keanu whispered, that if she knew, she would step away. I thought she would think I misunderstood her kindness. I thought she would feel uncomfortable or burdened. His voice broke very slightly. So I stayed quiet. The host rubbed his forehead softly. He felt the weight of it. And she walked away thinking I did not trust her, Keanu added, his voice aching with regret. The audience sat deeply still. That misunderstanding changed everything, he said quietly. For weeks, maybe longer, and I thought things were going to slowly fade between us. He paused. Until one night, when something happened that forced both of us to face the truth. The host breathed in sharply. What happened? Keanu lifted his eyes. There was something heavy in them. Something that made the room brace itself. It was late, he said slowly. The set was almost empty. She came to find me again. The audience leaned forward. And she asked me a question I had never imagined she would ask. The host blinked. What question? Keanu opened his mouth. And stopped. The studio froze with him. He took a slow breath. And finally whispered. She asked me if I had feelings for her. The audience gasped silently. The host's jaw tightened. And what did you say? He asked. Keanu lowered his eyes again, and his voice sank into a quiet confession. I told her no. The audience reacted with a mix of shock and sadness. But it was a lie, Keanu whispered, and it broke something between us. The host leaned in, barely breathing. What happened after that? He asked. Keanu's eyes darkened. His expression grew heavier. And his final words dropped into the room like a slow, deep echo. She walked away from me that night, completely, and the next morning something happened that I still regret to this day. The studio felt colder the moment Keanu finished his last words, as if every person inside the room instinctively understood that what he was about to reveal next carried a weight far greater than anything he had said before. The host did not rush him. He leaned back, giving Keanu the space to breathe, because the expression on Keanu's face told him that the next memory was not only painful, but also something that had lived in silence for far too long. The audience shifted slowly, their bodies quiet but their hearts racing, because the tension of the moment wrapped around them like a tightening rope. Keanu looked down at his hands again, the way people do when they are about to open an old wound that never healed properly. His fingers were locked together, rigid and tense, almost as if he was holding on to something that kept slipping away from him. He inhaled deeply, but the breath shook slightly, revealing how heavy the memory still was. The next morning, he began softly. Everything changed the moment I stepped onto the set. The host's brows lowered gently. Because of what you told her. Keanu nodded once slowly. Yes, because of the lie I told her, and because she believed it. The air grew thicker, the audience leaned in even closer. Keanu's voice grew softer, almost fragile. I reached the set early, hoping I could talk to her before filming started. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to explain why I had lied. I wanted to make things right, but when I arrived, everyone was unusually quiet. People whispered. People looked at me differently. There was something in the air that felt wrong. The host straightened slightly. What happened? Keanu swallowed hard. I saw her sitting alone near one of the cameras. She looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally drained, the way a person looks when they have spent the entire night trying to make sense of something that hurt them. The audience felt that line deeply, their eyes softening with empathy. I walked toward her, Keanu continued, my heart beating so loudly that I was sure she could hear it. I rehearsed the words in my head. I wanted to say I was sorry. I wanted to tell her I did not mean to hurt her. I wanted to tell her that I lied because I was afraid of losing her. He paused, his voice tightening, but before I could even take a few steps, our director stepped between us. The host blinked, surprised. The director stopped you. Keanu nodded, yes, and his face told me something was wrong. He did not smile. He did not greet me. He just looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen before. He exhaled slowly, as if the memory still burned. He told me that Sandra had requested a change. The audience held their breath. She asked to switch the shooting schedule for the day, Keanu said softly. She asked to do her scenes without me. She asked to keep her distance. The studio fell into a suffocating silence. I felt something break inside me, Keanu whispered, not because she was angry, not because she wanted space, but because I knew I had caused her that pain, and she did not deserve any of it. His voice grew quieter but heavier. I wanted to walk toward her anyway. I wanted to talk to her even if she did not want to talk to me, but she looked away the moment she saw me trying to move closer. She lowered her gaze, she avoided my eyes, and the distance between us felt like a wall I had built with my own hands. The host placed a hand near his mouth, stunned by the depth of the moment. So you did not talk to her that day? He asked carefully. Keanu shook his head slowly. No, she stayed far from me. She filmed her scenes fast, without her usual energy, without her usual spark, and when she finished, she left the set immediately. She did not say goodbye to anyone. The host's voice softened. That must have hurt. A faint, broken smile crossed Keanu's lips. It did, more than I expected, because at that point she was not just a friend or a co-worker. She was the one person who had understood me when I could not understand myself. She was the only person who had cared enough to look into the weight I carried, and losing her, or even thinking I had lost her, felt like losing a piece of myself. The audience felt the sadness ripple through the room, and several people wiped their eyes. Keanu continued, his voice trembling at the edges. I went home that night feeling like the world had grown heavier again. The loneliness returned. The silence in my house felt sharper, and the guilt was almost unbearable. He paused, letting the emotion settle in the room before he continued. I sat on my couch for a long time thinking about the past weeks, thinking about the moments we shared, thinking about her laughter, her kindness, her presence, thinking about how she made the world feel a little less heavy, and I realized something painful. The host leaned forward. What did you realize? Keanu lifted his eyes, and for the first time since the story began, there was something raw, vulnerable, and deeply honest in them. I realized that I cared about her far more than I wanted to admit, he whispered, and losing her made everything inside me collapse. A quiet shiver passed through the audience. I should have told her the truth that night, Keanu said. I should have told her I cared. I should have told her I was scared of my own feelings. I should have told her that her presence had become the light in one of the darkest periods of my life. The host nodded slowly, and you wanted to fix it the next day. Keanu gave a slow, painful nod. Yes, I made up my mind to find her and talk to her. I planned to arrive earlier than everyone and wait for her, but when I stepped onto the set the next morning, she was not there. The host's eyes widened. She did not come. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. They told me she had called the director, he said. They said she needed a break. They said she would be away for a few days. The audience felt the shock. The host whispered, because of what happened between you two. Keanu nodded, yes, and that knowledge added a new kind of pain. It was not just that she walked away that night, she walked away from the entire project for a while, and I was the reason. His voice cracked slightly. She needed distance from me to breathe, to think, to heal, and I could not blame her. He took another breath. But those days without her, they felt like months, and the silence inside the set felt even heavier. I realized just how much she filled the space, how much she brought life into every corner of the room. The host shook his head slowly, overwhelmed by the emotional depth. How long was she gone? He asked softly. Keanu looked down. 5 days, but it felt like forever. A member of the audience covered her mouth, her eyes full of emotion. And when she returned, Keanu continued, everything felt different. She was polite. She was professional. She greeted me with a small nod, but the warmth was gone, the closeness was gone, the connection was gone. His voice deepened with regret. And every time I tried to talk to her, she kept it short, distant, safe. The host rubbed his thumb across his knuckles slowly. That must have been very painful. Keanu nodded. It was, because I could feel her putting up walls that used to be open, and I could not blame her for any of it. He paused. But then something happened, something none of us expected, something that forced both of us back into the same space. The audience leaned in. The host slowly straightened. What happened? Keanu's expression shifted. His eyes grew darker. A personal emergency happened on set, he said, and she was involved. The host's breath caught. Involved how? Keanu looked at him with a mixture of fear and memory. She collapsed. The studio gasped silently. The host stared stunned. Collapsed. Keanu nodded slowly, the memory clearly painful to revisit. Yes, he whispered, and in that moment, everything inside me changed. The audience trembled with anticipation. The host leaned in. What did you do? Keanu's jaw tightened as he prepared to reveal the moment that would change everything. I ran to her before anyone else, he said softly, and the truth I had buried inside me for so long finally broke free. The studio became so silent after Keanu's last words that even the small mechanical clicks from the cameras sounded loud, almost intrusive, as if the machines themselves felt they were witnessing something too personal to record. The host did not breathe for a moment. The audience sat frozen, unable to blink. Keanu's voice had carried such sincerity, such raw memory, that every person in that room felt the pain he still held. Keanu inhaled slowly, gathering the memory that lay just ahead in his mind, the one that marked the turning point in everything that happened between him and Sandra. She collapsed, he repeated softly, as though reminding himself it had truly happened. And it happened so fast that none of us understood what was going on at first. 1 second she was talking to the makeup artist, and the next she was gripping the side of the table trying to stay steady. The host leaned forward, studying the tension in Keanu's shoulders. What did you do? He asked. Keanu's eyes darkened with the reflection of that morning. I was standing on the opposite side of the room. I heard a sound like a soft gasp, and I looked up just in time to see her fall forward. I did not think. I did not hesitate. My body moved before my mind could. I ran across the room as fast as I could. The audience held their breath, imagining the scene with vivid clarity. When I reached her, Keanu said, his voice trembling slightly, she was on the ground, her breathing shallow, her face pale, and her hands shaking. And the moment I touched her shoulder, something inside me broke open, like a dam that had been holding back everything for years. He closed his eyes, feeling the memory as if it was happening again. I said her name, he whispered, not calmly, not gently. I said it with fear, real fear, the kind of fear you feel when you think someone important is slipping away from you. The host swallowed. What did she say? Keanu shook his head slowly. She could not say much. Her eyes opened for a moment, just long enough to look at me, and in that look I saw everything: the hurt from our misunderstanding, the distance she had created for safety, the confusion, the questions, and something else I did not expect. He paused, letting the tension stretch. I saw that she still cared. The audience reacted emotionally, their eyes softening. I held her in my arms, Keanu continued slowly. I kept calling her name. I tried to keep her awake. The crew rushed over. The medic arrived. But in those first few seconds before anyone else could reach her, she looked at me with a kind of sadness I had never seen. His voice dropped lower. And she whispered something. The host leaned forward sharply. What did she whisper? Keanu's breath shook. She said, "Why did you push me away?" A quiet wave of emotion rippled across the room. Listeners placed hands over their mouths. Someone wiped tears with the back of their wrist. And hearing her ask that, Keanu said, shattered me, because she deserved the truth long before that moment. She deserved honesty. She deserved clarity. She deserved something better than silence and fear from me. The host nodded slowly, understanding the weight. The medic checked her and said she needed to be taken to a clinic, Keanu continued. She was dehydrated, exhausted, overwhelmed. The stress had built up for days, and part of that stress was me. It was the misunderstanding between us. It was the emotional pressure she carried quietly because she cared. He exhaled heavily. They helped her sit up. She tried to stand, but her legs were weak, and before anyone else could support her, I put my arm around her. She leaned into me without even thinking. The host looked moved. She trusted you in that moment. Keanu nodded. Yes, even after everything, even after the distance, even after my lie. His voice softened further. We walked slowly to the car outside. The medic rode with us. I stayed by her side the whole time, and the entire drive she held the sleeve of my jacket with her fingers curled tightly around it. She did not say anything else. She did not have to. The audience watched him closely, their hearts pulled into the quiet intensity of the memory. When we arrived, Keanu said, they took her inside for tests. They made her rest. They put her on fluids, and I sat outside the room, my hands shaking, my heart pounding, realizing just how badly I had messed things up, and how terrified I was of losing her. He looked at the host with a deep sadness. I sat there for hours. I did not move. I did not eat. I did not check my phone. I just waited. The host nodded. Because you cared. Keanu took a slow breath. Because I cared more than I could say. He continued, his voice growing heavier. After a while, the doctor came out and said she was stable. He said she could have visitors. And when I walked into her room, everything inside me changed. The audience leaned in. She was awake, Keanu said softly. She was sitting up. Her eyes were a little tired, but she smiled when she saw me. A small, fragile smile. And when I sat down beside her, she did something I did not expect. He paused, letting the suspense grow. She reached out her hand. The host lifted his brows. She reached for you. Keanu nodded, yes, slowly, gently, like she wanted to make sure I would not pull away. He swallowed. And when I took her hand, she looked at me and said, I thought you did not need me anymore. The room froze. Keanu's voice cracked slightly, and hearing her say that felt like someone pressed a hand into my chest, because that was never the truth. The truth was I needed her more than I had allowed myself to admit. The host leaned forward. Did you tell her that? Keanu shook his head, regret flickering across his face. Not then. I was afraid. I was afraid of hurting her again if I said the wrong thing. I was afraid of confusing her. I was afraid of making promises I did not know how to keep. So instead of telling her the truth, I said something safe, something small, something that did not fix anything. He lowered his eyes. I said I was sorry she felt that way. The audience reacted quietly, feeling the pain of the missed moment. She looked down, Keanu continued. I could tell she wanted more. She wanted honesty. She wanted clarity, but I did not give it. His voice grew heavier. And that silence created a new kind of distance between us, a softer distance, a polite distance, the kind that grows slowly but cuts deeply. The host rubbed his forehead gently. So what happened next? Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. We finished the film, he said, professionally, politely, kindly, but the closeness was gone, the laughter was less frequent. the quiet moments disappeared, the understanding we once shared was replaced by carefulness. He paused. And when the last day of filming came, I thought maybe I would finally tell her the truth. The audience straightened eagerly. I waited for the right moment, Keanu continued. I waited until the crew dispersed. I waited until she was gathering her things. I waited until she turned toward the exit. His voice softened into a whisper. I walked toward her. The host breathed slowly. And then he asked. Keanu's expression shifted, a mixture of heartbreak and memory. Someone called her name before I reached her, he said, and she turned. She smiled, not at me but at the man who walked toward her, someone she knew, someone who put his arm around her shoulders. The audience's breath caught sharply. The host whispered, who was he? Keanu looked down at the table. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, someone she started seeing. The audience gasped silently. The host froze. You mean she was with someone? He asked. Keanu nodded slowly, painfully. Yes, and I found out in the worst way. The room stood still. The host leaned forward, his voice soft with shock. And what did you do? Keanu's answer came quietly, carrying the full weight of the moment. I walked away, he said, because I thought I had lost my chance forever. The audience felt a wave of heartbreak. But Keanu was not finished. He looked at the host with a haunting kind of calm. But years later, something happened that made that story very different from what I thought. The host blinked. Years later. Keanu nodded slowly. And that, he said, is the part I never talked about publicly. The host leaned closer. What happened? Keanu took a slow breath. She reached out to me, he whispered. After all those years, out of nowhere, and what she told me completely changed the way I understood everything. The audience held their breath. The host whispered, what did she tell you? Keanu lifted his eyes. The studio felt heavier than ever before as Keanu paused, preparing to reveal the part of the story he had carried in silence for years. The host leaned in, the audience leaned forward, and even the faint hum of the studio lights seemed to quiet itself in anticipation. Keanu's eyes softened as he pressed his palms together, his fingers trembling slightly not from nerves, but from the weight of a memory he had kept tucked deep inside himself. He took a slow breath, grounding himself, then lifted his gaze to meet the host's with a mixture of vulnerability and clarity. Years passed, Keanu began quietly, and life moved in directions I never expected. I worked on different films, traveled, grew, healed in some ways, broke in others. And even though Sandra and I stayed friendly on the surface, our lives drifted into separate paths. We crossed occasionally at events at gatherings, but it was always polite, always distant, always safe. The connection we once shared stayed buried beneath everything unsaid. The host nodded slowly, understanding how time can build walls around old wounds. Keanu continued softly, I thought she had moved on completely. I thought her life was full, happy, untouched by the memories of the time we spent together on that film. I told myself that the moment had passed, that whatever we could have been had faded with the years. He paused, letting the weight of time settle into the room. But then, he whispered, one night changed everything. The audience leaned in breathlessly. Keanu's voice grew softer, more emotional. I was at home, it was late, I had just come back from a long day on set. I turned off the lights, sat on the couch and let the quiet settle, and then my phone buzzed. The host tightened his fingers around his cup. A message. Keanu nodded slowly. Yes, I picked it up, not expecting anything unusual, but when I saw the name on the screen, my heart stopped. The studio tensed with anticipation. It was Sandra, Keanu said, barely above a whisper. After years, out of nowhere, she texted me. The audience reacted quietly, stunned. The message was short, he continued, just a single line, but that one line opened a door I thought had been sealed forever. The host leaned in. What did she say? Keanu drew in a breath, steadying himself before he spoke the words that had lived inside him ever since. She wrote, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. The audience trembled with emotion. The host whispered, and what did you do? Keanu smiled faintly, but it was a sad smile, touched with regret and hope at the same time. At first, I stared at the message for a long time. My mind raced through every possibility, every memory, every moment we had shared. I wondered if she wanted closure or forgiveness, or if something had happened in her life that made her reflect on the past. His voice slowed. But a part of me, a quiet part I had tried to bury, hoped she wanted to talk because she missed me. The host's expression softened. I texted her back, Keanu said. I told her I was awake. I told her she could call me if she wanted, and within seconds the phone rang. The audience inhaled sharply, swept up in the tension. When I answered, Keanu said, her voice was shaky, not sad, not broken, just full of something she had been carrying for too long. He paused, feeling the memory pulse through him. She asked me if I remembered the last day of filming, the moment she walked away with someone else. The host's eyes narrowed with curiosity. Did she explain it? Keanu nodded, yes, and what she told me completely changed how I understood everything. The room leaned toward him. She said the man she left with that day was not her partner, not her boyfriend, not someone she was seeing. The audience stiffened. The host blinked, then who was he? Keanu swallowed slowly. He was her friend, an old friend, someone who had come to congratulate her on finishing the film. The studio held its breath. She told me, Keanu continued, that she asked him to put his arm around her because she panicked. She did not want me to see how hurt she still was. She did not want me to see her cry. She did not want me to know how deeply my lie had cut her. The host's jaw slackened. Keanu's voice trembled. She walked away with him because she needed a shield, because she didn't want me to see the truth. The host leaned forward, and what truth was that? Keanu looked up slowly, his eyes heavy with a mixture of longing and sorrow. She told me she cared about me, he whispered. Years ago, deeply, more than she ever planned to, and when I told her I did not feel the same, it broke something in her that took a long time to heal. The audience gasped softly, overwhelmed by the raw honesty. She said she never hated me, Keanu went on. She never resented me, she just needed space to protect herself. And that day on set, when she collapsed, she had been carrying the emotional weight of everything she thought she lost. The host rubbed the back of his neck, floored by the emotional depth. But that was not all she told me, Keanu whispered. The audience leaned in further. She said the reason she messaged me after all those years was because she had recently learned something that made her think about the past differently. The host narrowed his eyes. Learned what? Keanu exhaled slowly, allowing the memory to rise. She told me she had spoken to someone who knew what I was going through back then, he said. Someone who saw how hard I tried to hide the pain from everyone. Someone who told her about my sister. Someone who explained how overwhelmed I had been. The host whispered she didn't know. Keanu shook his head. No, she only knew I had pulled away. She only saw my distance. She didn't know the storm that was happening behind the scenes. She didn't know how much fear I was carrying. She didn't know how much I cared. He lowered his voice. And she told me that learning the truth broke her heart all over again. The audience sank deeper into the emotion. Because she realized, Keanu continued softly, that we had both been hurting for the same reason. We both cared, we both were scared, and neither of us knew how to say it. The host covered his mouth, overwhelmed. And then, Keanu said quietly, she told me the words I never expected to hear. The room trembled. The host leaned forward slightly. What did she say? He asked. Keanu's voice softened to a whisper that carried through the room like a confession floating in warm air. She said, I was in love with you back then. The audience went silent, the kind of silence that comes when the heart stops for a moment. Those words hit me like a wave, Keanu said, because they were everything I had once felt but was too afraid to share, everything I had lost, everything I had buried. His voice deepened. And hearing her say them brought back every moment we never had, every chance I ran from, every truth I hid. The host whispered, did you tell her you felt the same? Keanu looked away for a long moment. Then back at the host. And finally said, I wanted to tell her everything, the truth, the fear, the regret, the feelings I buried, but before I could speak, she told me something else. The host leaned in closer, almost afraid to ask. What did she tell you? He whispered. Keanu's jaw tightened. His eyes lowered. And his final words fell into the room like a quiet storm. She told me she was afraid it was too late. The audience inhaled sharply. The host felt a chill. Too late for what? He asked. Keanu lifted his eyes, filled with a deep, quiet ache. And whispered, too late for us. The weight of Keanu's final words from Part 5 settled over the studio like a heavy curtain, dimming the room with a mixture of heartbreak, regret, and the quiet knowledge that the story was about to reach the moment everyone feared and hoped for at the same time. The host leaned forward slowly, his hands tightening together on the table, sensing that the next part of the confession carried the deepest truth of all. The audience sat frozen, breathing softly, almost afraid to move in case they disturbed the fragile honesty unfolding before them. Keanu took a slow, steady breath, the kind a person takes when they stand at the edge of a cliff, remembering the fall and preparing to relive it. His eyes lowered for a moment, then lifted again, filled with something old and tender. When she said it might be too late, he began quietly, the world felt like it stopped. Those words, they cut deeper than anything before because they carried years of lost chances. They carried everything I was afraid to admit. The host nodded slightly, urging him to continue. I wanted to tell her it was not too late, Keanu said, his voice trembling. I wanted to tell her that the feelings never left, that they had just changed shape and waited patiently inside me. But before I could get a single word out, she started talking again. He paused, reliving the moment. She said she had been thinking about the past for weeks. She said she wanted to understand what we had both felt but never said. She wanted to know if she had imagined the connection between us or if it was real, and then she told me she had finally found her answer. The host raised his brows slightly. What answer did she find? Keanu inhaled slowly. She said she realized that what we had was real, that it was quiet but strong, gentle but deep, something she had not forgotten even after all the years. The audience softened, their faces touched by the tenderness of the moment. But she was afraid, Keanu continued. She said people change. Time changes things, hearts shift, priorities shift. She said she did not know if the man she cared about back then was the same man she was talking to now. The host's expression was empathetic, and how did you respond to that? Keanu gave a slow, sad smile. I told her the truth. I told her I had changed. I had grown. I had learned how to let people in. I had learned how to ask for help. I had learned how to value the people who cared about me, and I told her that even though I had changed, the part of me that cared about her had never gone away. The audience collectively swallowed the emotion. There was a long silence after I said that, Keanu said. Not a heavy silence, not a painful one, just a quiet moment where both of us were finally honest. After years of pretending, after years of pushing feelings aside, after years of carrying our own fears separately. The host's voice was soft, and what did she say? Keanu's eyes drifted, remembering. She cried, he whispered, not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, quiet tears, the kind that come from relief and regret at the same time, and when she caught her breath, she said something I never thought I would hear. The room tensed. She said, I wish we had talked back then, I wish we had given ourselves a chance. The host felt his chest tighten, the audience leaned in, pulled deeply into the quiet heartbreak. I felt the same, Keanu said, but I did not want the moment to turn into another regret, so I asked her something simple, something honest. The host whispered, what did you ask? Keanu took a slow breath. I asked her if she wanted to see me, he said, not as co-workers, not as past memories, but as two people finally ready to talk. The audience held their breath. There was another silence, Keanu continued, and then she said yes. She said she wanted to see me, she wanted to talk face to face, she wanted to finally close the distance between us. The host smiled faintly. That must have felt hopeful. Keanu nodded. It did, more than I expected. We agreed to meet the next evening, somewhere quiet, somewhere private, somewhere we could talk without distractions. His voice grew softer. But life has a way of teaching us that timing is not always in our control. The studio shifted with a quiet sense of dread. The host whispered, what happened? Keanu looked down, his expression darkening with a slow ache. The next morning, he said quietly, I received another message from her. The audience leaned in sharply, sensing the emotional turning point. She said she could not meet me that evening, Keanu continued. She said something came up, something personal, something urgent. The host's brows lowered. Did she explain? Keanu shook his head. No, she only said she needed time. She said she would reach out again soon, she promised. The audience softened with sympathy. Days passed, Keanu said, then weeks. I sent her a few messages just to check in, but she did not respond. I told myself she was busy. I told myself she needed space. I tried not to worry. His voice hardened with held emotion. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. The host listened intently. Then one evening, Keanu said, I got a call from a friend we both knew, someone who had been close to her during the time we filmed together, and when I answered, I heard the kind of pause that only comes with bad news. The audience tensed. He told me she had been going through something difficult, Keanu said softly, something she did not want anyone to know, something she had been trying to face alone. The host leaned forward. What was she dealing with? Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. She had lost someone in her family, he whispered, and she did not want to bring that pain into our conversation. She did not want to mix grief with the fragile moment we were trying to rebuild, so she stepped back. She tried to handle everything alone. The audience exhaled slowly, moved by the quiet tragedy. Keanu continued, I wished she had told me, I wished she had trusted me, I wished I could have been there for her the way she once was for me, but I understood. Grief makes people retreat. Grief makes people close the doors they once opened. His voice softened further. So I waited months. I sent one message every now and then, never pushing, never demanding, just letting her know I was there if she needed me. The host's eyes softened. And then, Keanu said, one afternoon she finally replied. The audience leaned in once more, their hearts tightening. She said she was sorry, Keanu whispered. She said she had needed time to breathe, time to heal, time to understand what she felt, and then she thanked me for waiting. The host nodded gently. We agreed to meet again, Keanu said, this time for real, no doubts, no delays, no excuses. The room brightened with hope. And when she walked toward me that evening, Keanu continued, his voice warming, I saw her the way I had seen her all those years ago. Strong, gentle, grounding, real, and the moment she smiled at me, I knew the connection was still there. The host exhaled, relieved. We sat together for hours, Keanu said, talking about everything, the past, the silence, the misunderstandings, the missed chances, the feelings we never said, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation, something shifted. The audience hung on every word. She reached across the table, Keanu whispered, and took my hand the same way she did in that hospital room years ago. His eyes softened. And I did not pull away this time. The studio grew warm with emotion. She told me she still cared, Keanu said, not in the same way as back then, not with the urgency of youth, but with something quieter, something steadier, something that had survived years of distance. He paused, letting the beauty of the moment settle. And I told her the truth too, he said softly. I told her I cared about her, deeply, that I always had, that I always would, but I also told her that I did not want to force anything, that all I wanted was to be present, to be honest, to be real, whatever shape that took. The host smiled gently, and how did she respond? Keanu's lips curved into the faintest, warmest smile. She said she wanted the same, he whispered, peace, honesty, presence, and a kind of closeness that did not need labels or promises to be real. The audience felt their hearts soften. We walked for a long time that night, Keanu said, through quiet streets filled with soft lights. We talked about life, about pain, about healing, about timing, about second chances that do not look like the first. And when it was time to say goodbye, she hugged me in a way that felt like letting go of years of silence. His voice warmed even further. And for the first time, he said, I felt like we had finally understood each other, not as two people who missed their chance, but as two people who found a new one. The host nodded softly. So where do things stand now? Keanu's expression brightened, gentle and sincere. We are in each other's lives, he said, not in a dramatic way, not in a rushed way, but in a real way. We check in, we talk, we support each other. It is steady. It is warm, it is honest, it is enough for now, maybe more one day, maybe something different, but what matters is that the distance is gone. The audience sighed with relief, moved by the quiet, mature resolution. Keanu looked down for a moment, then up again with a soft smile. And sometimes, he said quietly, the story we think ended long ago is really just taking a different shape, something quieter, something wiser, something built on honesty instead of fear. The room felt illuminated by the warmth of his words. The host drank it in for a moment, then asked gently, if you could go back, would you change anything? Keanu thought for a long moment, then shook his head. No, he said, because every mistake taught us something. Every misunderstanding shaped who we became. Every silence showed us what needed to be said. We found each other again in a way that felt earned, real, human. The host nodded, touched by the calm wisdom of the answer. And if she is watching this interview, the host asked softly, is there anything you wish you could say to her right now? Keanu paused, breathed deeply, and let the emotion rise naturally. Then he spoke with a quiet strength. I would say thank you for seeing me when I was trying to disappear. Thank you for caring when I did not know how to let anyone in. Thank you for coming back into my life, and thank you for letting the story continue. The audience sat in absolute silence, deeply moved. Keanu finished softly. And I would tell her, I am grateful for you. The host swallowed, visibly touched. That was powerful, man. Keanu smiled gently. Some stories asked to be told, this was mine. The audience slowly erupted into soft, emotional applause, not loud, not chaotic, but full of heart, full of appreciation for a truth shared with courage and vulnerability. The studio lights glowed a little brighter. The host nodded with deep respect. Keanu exhaled slowly, like a weight had finally lifted after years of staying locked inside. And as the cameras continued to record the final moments of the interview, the story of Keanu and Sandra settled into the room like a warm, lingering echo, a reminder that timing is fragile, feelings are complex, and sometimes the quietest love stories are the ones that survive.